Hello YouTube. Humans are weirdly hard to kill. Obviously we're not indestructible, people get injured all the time. We are in many ways fragile little creatures. We get sunburned, throw our backs out picking up laundry baskets, and a surprising number of people manage to injure themselves while standing completely still. But every now and then, you hear a survival story that makes you wonder, what are the limits of the human body? People have survived plane explosions, deserts, oceans, jungles, and situations so absurd that they sound like the plot of a movie that critics would describe as unrealistic. So, here are 5 of the craziest human survival stories ever recovered. Let's start with somebody who survived falling out of the sky. In 1972, a flight attendant named Vesna Vulovic was working aboard a passenger aircraft flying over what was then Czechoslovakia. While the plane was cruising at over 10,000 meters, it exploded. This is generally considered the point where things stop being recoverable. Commercial aircraft are not designed around the possibility of suddenly becoming several smaller aircrafts. The plane broke apart in mid-air and the wreckage scattered across the landscape below. Yet somehow, Vesna survived. To this day, she's credited with surviving the highest fall ever recorded without a parachute. The explanation is surprisingly mundane, considering how ridiculous the outcome is. Investigators believe she was trapped inside a section of the aircraft as it fell. Instead of hitting solid ground directly, that section crashed into a snowy mountain covered with trees. That's still an impact that should have killed her. It just happened to be slightly less fatal than it could have been. She suffered a fractured skull, multiple broken bones, spinal injuries, and spent days in a coma. But eventually, she did recover. Survival stories often involve somebody making a series of clever decisions. They find water, build shelter, navigate difficult terrain, or improvise a solution to a problem. Vesna's story is mostly just a bizarre chain of events that somehow lined up perfectly enough to keep one person alive. And oddly enough, she isn't even the only person on the list who survived falling from an airplane. Just 1 year earlier, another teenager experienced something very similar. Her name was Juliane Koepke. In December of 1971, Juliane was flying over the Peruvian Amazon with her mother. During the flight, the aircraft entered a thunderstorm. A lightning strike hit the plane. The plane began breaking apart in midair. Already, this is a bad sign. When aircraft engineers discuss desirable plane behavior, breaking into pieces above a rainforest usually does not make the list. Juliane was still strapped into her seat as she fell, thousands of meters into the Amazon. And somehow, she survived. The fall itself is already one of the most unbelievable parts of the story, but what happened afterwards is arguably even more impressive. When Juliane woke up, she was injured, disoriented, and completely alone. Her mother was gone. The wreckage was scattered across the rainforest. She was only 17 years old, and in the middle of the Amazon. The Amazon rainforest is hot, dense, difficult to navigate, and full of insects. Not to mention, it is extremely easy to get lost in. Fortunately, Juliane had grown up around biologists. Her parents had worked in the region, and she remembered something useful. Water leads to people. Small streams eventually connect to larger streams, which connect to rivers, and rivers often have settlements nearby. So she followed water, day by day, for 11 days. She dealt with injuries, exhaustion, infection, and the general inconvenience of being stranded in one of the largest rainforests on Earth. Eventually, she found a small shelter and a boat used by local fishermen. Not long afterwards, she was rescued. Out of everyone aboard the flight, she was the only survivor. Now, let's move away from the rainforest to arguably the only place on Earth less welcoming, the Sahara Desert. In 1994, an Italian endurance athlete named Mauro Prosperi entered the Marathon des Sables. This race is often described as one of the toughest foot races in the world. Participants run hundreds of kilometers across the Sahara over multiple days while carrying much of their own equipment, which already sounds unpleasant. During the race, a massive sandstorm rolled in. Visibility disappeared, and Mauro became separated from the course. At first, he assumed he would find his way back, but he didn't. The Sahara is very large. This becomes especially noticeable when you're lost inside it. For days, he wandered through the desert searching for help. His food supplies dwindled, his water ran out, and temperatures climbed. At one point, he found an abandoned shrine that provided temporary shelter. He also found bats living inside it. To stay alive, Mauro caught the bats and drank their blood. Additionally, he drank his own urine. He ate whatever he could find. As the days passed, his condition became increasingly desperate. Eventually, he became convinced that rescue wasn't coming. But 9 days after getting lost, he was finally discovered. Not in Morocco where the race was being held, but in Algeria. He had accidentally crossed an international border while wandering through the desert. By the time rescuers found him, he had lost a massive amount of body weight and was suffering from severe dehydration. But luckily, he survived. Next is probably the most famous survival story on the list, mostly because it involves a solution that nobody wants to think about. In 2003, Aaron Ralston was hiking through Blue John Canyon in Utah. While climbing through a narrow section of rock, a boulder shifted. His right arm became trapped between the rock and the canyon wall. Unfortunately, Aaron was in a remote canyon. He hadn't told anyone exactly where he was going, and the boulder wasn't moving. He spent hours trying to free himself, then days. He rationed his food and water. He tried everything that he could think of, but nothing worked. 5 days passed. fast. At this point, he was running out of options. Aaron realized that if he wanted to survive, he would have to amputate his own arm, which eventually he did. The details are pretty unpleasant, so I'll keep them brief. What matters is that he succeeded. After freeing himself, the story still wasn't over. He then had to climb out of the canyon and travel through the desert while severely injured, before finally encountering other people who could help him. When most people hear the story, they focus on the amputation, which is understandable, but what's equally impressive is the mental endurance involved. Being trapped for 5 days with no rescue in sight would be enough to break a lot of people long before the physical challenges became overwhelming. Aaron survived because he was willing to do something that nobody else could imagine doing. And finally, we have a story that lasted longer than all of the others combined. The story of Poon Lim. During World War II, Poon Lim worked aboard a British merchant ship. In 1942, the ship was torpedoed by a German submarine and sank. Poon managed to escape aboard a small wooden raft. At first, he had a few supplies, some water, some food, and a handful of basic necessities. The problem was that rescue never arrived. Days passed, then weeks, and eventually the supplies ran out. At that point, survival became entirely dependent on improvisation. Poon collected rainwater whenever storms appeared. He fashioned fishing equipment from whatever materials he could find. He caught fish. He caught seabirds. He used parts of those birds as bait to catch more fish. He learned how to survive on a tiny raft in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean because there wasn't really any other choice. The isolation alone is difficult to imagine. For months, every direction looked exactly the same, just water. Sometimes ships appeared in the distance, but they disappeared soon after. Several opportunities for rescue slipped away. Still, he survived. After 133 days adrift, he was finally rescued near the coast of Brazil. 133 days. That's over 4 months floating alone in the Atlantic. What's especially impressive is how practical his survival became. He didn't survive because of one miraculous event. He survived because he gradually turned himself into a functioning one-man ecosystem. Everything necessary to stay alive had to be figured out while sitting on a raft barely larger than a dining table. Looking at all these 5 stories, it's striking how different they are. There's no single lesson that connects them, but they all demonstrate the same reality. Humans can be pretty awesome.